Hello. Oh my gosh, my lights aren't on. You would think that I would have like a checklist now of all of the things that I have to do to be like ready. I don't. Oh, hi. Hello, hello. How are you today? Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much. It was a bad hair day, so I tried to hide it as much as possible. 11 vibes. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Oh, hey, Falcor. Oh, hello. Oh my God, is that emote? Is that cloud? Just open this up real quick. There we go. I didn't want it to be like right in your ear. So cute. I caught your VOD, and the cloud cam is just everything that I would have ever wanted. Oh, oh, of course, of course. Sorry I hopped in so late last night. I like forgot what day it was, and I was like, I need to I need to go say hello. Sorry, I have a spam call. I've been getting insane amount of spam calls. Since January 1st, I've gotten at least 3 spam calls a day. And like all of January, I didn't really do anything because like I'm not going to answer it. I know that it's just computers, like that sort of thing. Um, but like in February, I started blocking the numbers, and I'm wondering if by blocking it it's like signaling that I'm a real person, and so now they just won't stop, and it's I'm not going to answer. No matter how many times telemarketers or spam risks call, I'm not going to do it. Yes, please tell me. You get a lot too? Yeah. My mom said that she was getting a lot for a very long time, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. Always in Chinese. Wow. That's interesting. Yeah, you have no idea what they're about. No idea what they're trying to sell or what they're trying to do. That's wild. So lighting is a little different today. I apologize, but with the time change, it's like bright out, which my, you know, my sadness in the winter is very excited that it's light out beyond 4 o'clock. But like you're gonna get some brightness back here just because of the closed blinds. So it'll just get darker as the night goes on. Much like much like the story Vera. Answer and say nothing and let them hang up. Okay, if it answers and they get no reply. Interesting. Interesting. Oh, hey, Honey Lemon. Hello, hello. Good to see you. Yeah, yeah. The winter is just a sad time. It just really is. Most of yours are recorded. Interesting. Interesting. Oh, Honey Lemon is challenging little bean. All right. We'll see. Starting the stream off right. Going down, Bean. Oh, it was a tie. It was a tie. So close. At least it wasn't an all out loss. My weekend was good. Social, which is good. So they say. No, I'm just kidding. I I'm definitely one of those people where uh like the day of whatever social it was, it's like, "Ugh, why did I do this? I have to like put pants on and like I'm gonna see people. Yeah, I like them, but like I don't know. And then during, it's a wonderful time. So I need to like remind myself that you always have fun. You always enjoy seeing the people that you see. So calm down. But yeah, this week is going to be like a recovery week of being silent by myself. I take a while to recharge. Yes. Discount batteries. Yes. Definitely not Energizer. Absolutely not. Also, I had coffee like after 2 p.m. So we're gonna be up for a while today because that's just how my body is now. Oh, you also feel that? Yeah, yeah. It's just got the manic energy. Yeah, like I was so tired all day today, like just physically tired, on top of being like socially tired. But I went on a walk and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get a coffee on the way back. So I like stopped and got a coffee. And it wasn't a great coffee, by any means, but my like eyes felt like they were like opening more, and I was feeling like a little jittery, which I'm better now, but like the my body was still tired. Like the rest of me was still like, what is happening? It's fine. And also, a couple years ago, I found out, well, I like surmised, I deduced that I have a caffeine intolerance, so I can't have it all that often, which means when I do have it, because I don't have it all the time, it like really hits me and like impacts me. What kind of individual drinks coffee after 2 p.m.? Yeah, yeah. Like I used to like drink coffee or caffeine like all the time and just not be bothered by it. And then like I was just feeling real gross, real crappy. And then I like weaned myself off of caffeine for a while to see if that was what it was, and it was. So I just don't drink it all that much. And now when I do, it's like I'm a child that has had like 50 pixie sticks and I'm just running through the fields with puppies. That's what it feels like. So very happy, very manic, lots of screams, both internal and external. I'll refrain from screaming today. Only internal. But yeah, that's the type of vibe we got going on right now. Um, let's see. Trying to think. Updates. I guess we'll just do book updates. Yesterday I started. Bop, bop, bop. I'll grab it here. Book Lovers by Emily Henry. It is billed as a romance book, which there is a romance in it. Um, there are tropes, romance tropes in it, of course. I am not a romance reader. I am reading it because it was a reader's choice for 2022, and I'm going through a list and just seeing what all the peoples are reading. Because if it was up to me, I would just be reading like sci-fi and upsetting, sad things all the time. But so I'm reading that. It's pretty good. And in chat, somebody said that it wasn't just about like the romance, it's also about like the sister relationship, which I think is really nice. And the main character is also somebody who said that they do not want children, which is not a main character that you get a lot, which is refreshing. It's nice to see that, and she's like I think in her 30s and just like super into her job and stuff. So it is in the romance genre, but I think yeah, it's in the romance genre. There's romancy things happening, but it's not like smutty romancy, at least not right now. It's very flirty, but like not necessarily like a grumpy sunshine dynamic, like a grumpy and grumpier dynamic. I think it's gonna be like enemies to lovers type deal. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see though. And so, like one of the reasons why I don't like reading romance, besides like the lovey-dovey they usually end up together, is that most of the time the romantic interest has a ton of red flags, and it's just built as a good healthy relationship when it's not at all, and I just don't like that. Like no thanks. So I just like avoid it. But so far so good. This one is this one is good. I have read another romance by her by the same author because it was the winner for 20 or the reader's choice for 2021, so I read it last year. So her writing is fine. Like it's good. It's adequate. Yes, or that red flags are sexy, which they're not. No thanks. No thanks. Oh no, Noodles, I'm so sorry to hear that. Brain, be nice. Well, I'm glad that you're here though. It's good to see you always. All right. Am I reading anything else? I read volume 9 of Berserk, which there are 13 deluxe editions, and then I think two more volumes that are out. The author died last year, but all of the notes for how the story is going to be finished are like written down, and the person who is finishing the story is somebody that the author has confided in and like knows how the story is going to end, and they're not going to like extrapolate all of these other stories. Like they just want to wrap it up and they just want it to be like a completed story. So yeah, so I just finished 9. I'm reading 10, but there's 13 deluxe editions, two more volumes that are out, and then I think one more is coming out, and then think that's the completed story. It's really good. It's a dark fantasy. Lots of content warnings though. So yeah, just a warning. The story's really good. You get invested in a lot of the characters. There's a lot of ambiguously gray characters. Uh, but yeah, I'm reading that. So that's why romance is good to break it up, because everything I read is like really upsetting and doom and gloom, and I know that says a lot about me, and I'm okay with it. I'm okay with what it says about me. Oh my god, Falcor, yes. I am so glad that Weems isn't supposed to be sexy. Yes. Gross. But there's totally stories that are like that. Um, yeah, so yeah, I'm totally glad that it's not like that. And speaking of content warnings, I totally forgot to put up the ones for today. So just give me a moment while I do that. Just in case somebody pops in, they get fair warning of what they're walking into. I wrote them down somewhere. Bup, bup, bup. Oopsie. Oopsie poopsie. There we go. Do you ever start typing something in like a search and you're like, ah, and then it pops up and you're like, ah, yes, and then you go to click it and then it changes last second? Because that happens to me all of the time. He would, oh, you're right, Noodles. He would totally be written as sexy in like a modern context. Okay, here we go. I found my notes. Okay, content warnings. Oh my gosh. The way that my camera is set up, anytime I type, it just seems like earthquakes are happening. And that's just because of the impact I have on the world over here. Oops. Thank you for being patient as camera shake intensifies. Yes. Please hold while I do all of the things. Okay. I guess we'll include this one too. I don't remember which one I included before. News and there we go. Okay. Bup, bup, bup. And we will pin this. Bup, bup, bup. Good. Good, good, good. All right. So today we are finishing Vera. I'm very excited. You see what I did there? I'm very excited to see how it ends. I am terrified for every character except for Weems. Like, I'm not terrified for him at all. Uh, I am scared for Aunt Dot, and I am scared for Lucy. I'm not scared for the help though. I don't think the people that are working for Weems, like anything is gonna physically is gonna happen to them. But I do worry for Dot, and I do worry for good old Lucy. Aunt Dot must survive. I agree. Okay, let's see. What happened last time? They finished their tour. They were in extremely uncomfortable situations with the chambermaid and the oh man, I really don't. The parlor maid? Parlor maid. I don't remember their titles. Uh, but super uncomfortable and basically Weems treating them worse than should be, like not human or like they're not intelligent. Yes, Lizzie and Chesterton, man, your your brains, your brains and your mems are so good. Yes, Lizzie and Chesterton. They both were on the receiving end of just terribleness about their service and the expectations that weren't said aloud but were assumed, and when they didn't do them, it was just very uncomfortable for everybody involved, including Lucy. And this is the second time that she's seen something happen like this, and he's just a terrible person. And towards the end of Thursday's reading, Lucy got sick, and they thought that it was just a cold. And
Hello, everybody. 8 whole months and Moog still hasn't omitted my chapter from the Book of Moog.
Star, thank you so much for the race up. Hello, welcome in. So glad that you're here. So glad that you have stayed in all of this chaos. Thank you so, so much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you. um, oh man, I'm too excited. I forgot. 8 months is also wild to me. Thank you so much for being here. Okay. So Lucy got sick and she's like, "Oh, it was just because like a cold. Every time I get a cold, it's over like at the end of the day." And it didn't happen, and she was having a terribly fitful sleep. The next day Weems and Lucy were supposed to go to London and do whatever they do in London. So like Lucy was like, "Can I sleep by myself because I don't feel good. I don't want to get you sick." And Weems is like, "No. We are married. We must stay in the same bed." And they do, and Weems is just like being a little man baby because Lucy is like tossing and turning and unable to sleep, and she's like sweating and she's so hot. And so he like gets up in the middle of the night in a fit and goes into another bed, like in another room. And the next morning he wakes up and Lucy is even worse than what she was before. And he's mad at her because she said that she is always feeling better at the end of the day and she looks worse, and she better be ready to go to London by whatever time of the train. So he leaves off to London, and Lucy's Aunt Dot, comes to visit. She makes a call to the house where they are supposed to be staying in London, and nobody is there. The like people who work there answer and is like, no, they're not here yet, that sort of thing. So then she calls the Willows, which is where they are currently staying, and gets the parlor maid, and says that no, Lucy hasn't left, like she's not feeling very well, blah blah blah. And her aunt thinks that it's not like a huge thing because why would Weems leave if it was just, like a cough or something. So she goes there and she sees just how awful Lucy is feeling. And Lucy is so much happier that Aunt Dot is there that she's like smiling and she's just like putting on a happy face because she is happy that her aunt is there, and she's happy that Weems is gone because now she can take a breath and she doesn't have to be like suffocated by somebody who's there constantly. And yeah, so her Aunt Dot thinks that all of this happiness that Lucy is exuding is because Weems is making her happy, and that their marriage is much happier than what Aunt Dot thought it was going to be. So we'll see. So yeah, Aunt Dot and Lucy are at the Willows right now, and Weems is en route to London. Yes, she did. Aunt Dot, you fool. Exactly, exactly. Noodles, you're totally right. Yes, she did eat a meal in the house before getting sick. So my thought was that maybe like she was being made sick so that Weems could take care of her, but he left, so I'm not really sure. We'll see. We'll see. Sorry, thank you so much for contributing to Sunday's stream. Mm, yes, it could totally be when she was locked out. Man, so much has happened to her in like 48 hours. Yes, it could absolutely be from when she was locked outside in the rain, too. Absolutely. Honey Lemon. Thank you so much for contributing to April's Sunday stream. All right, let's do it. Let's go. We're going to finish the book today. By George, we will finish it. I'm muting my phone, so I won't even know when I get another spam call. Ooh, Weems poisoned her and is now acting this way for cover. I don't think that's a tin hat theory. Or a tinfoil hat theory. I think that could very possibly be true. Noodles, thank you for contributing to the Sunday stream. All right, here we go. Chapter 27. Later on in the dining room, when she was reluctantly eating the meal prepared for her, Lucy still slept, or she would have asked to be allowed to have a biscuit by her bedside. Miss Entwistle said to Chesterton, who attended her, would she let her know when Mr. Weems telephoned, as she wished to speak to him. She was feeling more and more uneasy as time passed as to what Everard would think of her uninvited presence in his house. It was natural. But would he think so? Absolutely not. What wasn't natural was for her to feel uneasy, seeing that the house was also Lucy's, and that the child's face had hardly had room enough on it for the width of her smile of welcome. There, however, it was. Miss Entwistle felt like an interloper. It was best to face things. She not only felt like an interloper, but, in Everard's eyes, she was an interloper. This was the situation. His wife had a cold. A bad cold. But not anything serious. Nobody had sent for his wife's aunt. Nobody had asked her to come. And here she was. If that, in Everard's eyes, wasn't being an interloper, Miss Entwistle was sure he wouldn't know one if he saw one. In her life, she had read many books and was familiar with those elderly relatives frequently to be met in them, and usually female, who intrude on a newly married ménage and make themselves objectionable to one of the parties by sympathizing with the other one. There was no cause for sympathy here, and if there ever should be, Miss Entwistle would certainly never sympathize except from a neutral place. She wouldn't come into a man's house, and in the very act of being nourished by his food, sympathize with his wife. She would sympathize from London. Her honesty of intention, her single-mindedness were, she knew, complete. She didn't feel, she knew she wasn't, in the least like these relatives in books, and yet as she sat in Everard's chair, obviously it was his, the upholsterer's seat was his very shape inverted. She was afraid. Indeed, she was certain he would think she was one of them. There she was, she thought, come unasked, sitting in his place, eating his food. He usedn't to like her. Would he like her any better for this? From a desire not to have meals of his, she had avoided tea, but she hadn't been able to avoid dinner. And with each dish set before her, dishes produced surprisingly, as she couldn't but observe, at the end of an arm thrust to the minute through a door, she felt more and more acutely that she was in his eyes, if he could only see her. an interloper. No doubt it was Lucy's house, too, but it didn't feel as if it were, and she would have given much to be able to escape back to London that night. But whatever Everard thought of her intrusion, she wasn't going to leave Lucy. Not alone in this house. Not to wake up to find herself alone in that house. Besides, who knew how such a chill would develop? There ought, of course, to have been a doctor. When Everard rang up, as he would be sure to, the last thing to know about Lucy was, she would go to the telephone, announce her presence, and inquire whether it wouldn't be as well to have a doctor round in the morning. Therefore she asked Chesterton to let her know when Mr. Weems telephoned, and Chesterton, surprised, for it was not Weems's habit to telephone to the Willows, all his communications coming on postcards, paused just an instant before replying, "If you please, ma'am." Chesterton wondered what Weems was expected to telephone about. It wouldn't have occurred to her that it might be about the new Mrs. Weems's health, because he had not within her recollection ever telephoned about the health of a Mrs. Weems. Sometimes the previous Mrs. Weems's health gave way enough for her to stay in bed, but no telephoning from London had in consequence taken place. Accordingly, she wondered what message could be expected. "What time would Mr. Weems be likely to ring up?" asked Miss Entwistle presently, more for the sake of saying something than for a desire to know. She was going to that telephone, but she didn't want to. She was in no hurry for it. It wasn't impatience to meet Weems's voice making her talk to Chesterton. What was making her talk was the dining room. For not only did its bareness afflict her, and its glaring light, and its long empty table, and the way Chesterton's footsteps echoed up and down the uncarpeted floor, but there on the wall was that poor thing looking at her. She had no doubt whatever as to who it was standing up in that long, slim frock looking at her, and she was taken aback. In spite of her determination to like all the arrangements, it did seem to her tactless to have her there, especially as she had that trick of looking so very steadily at one, and when she turned her eyes away from the odd, suppressed smile, she didn't like what she saw on the other wall, either. That enlarged old man, that obvious progenitor. Having caught sight of both these pictures, which at night were much more conspicuous than by day, owing to the brilliant, unshaded lighting, Miss Entwistle had no wish to look at them again, and carefully looked either at her plate or at Chesterton's back as she hurried down the room to the dish being held out at the end of the remarkable arm. But being nevertheless much disturbed by their presence, and by the way she knew they weren't taking their eyes off her, however carefully she took hers off them, she asked Chesterton what time Weems would be likely to telephone merely in order to hear the sound of a human voice. Chesterton then informed her that her master never did telephone to the Willows, so that she was unable to say what time he would. "But," said Miss Entwistle, surprised, "you have a telephone." "If you please, ma'am," said Chesterton. Miss Entwistle didn't like to ask what, then, the telephone was for, because she didn't wish to embark on anything even remotely approaching a discussion of Everard's habits, so she wondered in silence. Chesterton, however, presently elucidated. She coughed a little at first, conspicuous that to volunteer a remark wasn't quite within her idea of the perfect parlor maid, and then she said, "It's owing to local convenience, ma'am. We find it indispensable in the isolated situation of the house. We gives our orders to the tradesmen by means of the telephone. Mr. Weems installed it for that purpose, he says, and objects to trunk calls because of the charges and the waste of Mr. Weems's time at the other end, ma'am." Yeah, real bad vibes. "Oh," said Miss Entwistle. "If you please, ma'am," said Chesterton. Miss Entwistle said nothing more. With her eyes fixed on her plate in order to avoid those other eyes, she wondered what she had better do. It was 8:30, and Everard hadn't rung up. If he were going to be anxious enough not to mind the trunk call charge, he would have been anxious enough before this. That he hadn't rung up showed he regarded Lucy's indisposition as slight. What, then, would he say to her uninvited presence there? Nothing, she was afraid. That would be really hospitable. And she had just eaten a pudding of his. It seemed to curdle up within her. No, no coffee, thank you, she said hastily, on Chesterton's inquiring if she wished it served in the library. She had had dinner because she couldn't help herself, urged to it by the servants, but she needn't proceed to extras. And the library. Wasn't it in the library that Everard was sitting the day that poor, smiling thing? Yes. She remembered Lucy telling her so. No. She would not have coffee in the library. But now, about telephoning. Really, the only thing to do, the only way of dignity, was to ring him up. Unless waiting any more for him to do it. Evidently he wasn't going to. She would ring him up, tell him she was there, and ask. She clung particularly to the doctor idea, because his presence would justify hers if the doctor hadn't better look in the morning. Thus it was that, sitting quiet in their basement, the Twites were startled about 9 o'clock that evening by the telephone bell. It sounded more uncanny than ever up there, making all that noise by itself in the dark. And when, hurrying up anxiously to it, Twite applied his ear, all that happened was that an extremely short-tempered voice told him to hold on. Twite held on, listening hard and hearing nothing. Say hello, Twite, presently advised Mrs. Twite from out of the anxious silence at the foot of the kitchen. Hello, said Twite, half-heartedly. Must be a wrong number, said Mrs. Twite, after more silence. Hang it up, and come and finish your supper. A very small voice said something very far away. Twite strained every nerve to hear. He hadn't yet had to face a trunk call, and he thought the phone was fainting. Hello? He said anxiously, trying to make the words sound polite. It's a wrong number, said Mrs. Twite, after further waiting. Hang it up. The voice, incredibly small, began to talk again, and Twite, unable to hear a word, kept on saying with increasing efforts to sound polite, Hello? Hello? Hang it up, said Mrs. Twite, who from the bottom of the stairs was always brave. That's what it is, said Twite at last, exhausted. It's a wrong number. And he went to the writing pad and wrote, A wrong number rang up, sir. Believed to be a lady. 9:10. So Miss Entwistle on the other end was defeated, and having done her best and not succeeded, she decided to remain quiescent, at any rate, till the morning. Quiescent and uncritical. She wouldn't worry. She wouldn't criticize. She would merely think of Everard in those terms of amiability which were natural to her. But while she was waiting for the call in the cold hall, there had been a moment when her fixed benevolence did a little loosen. Chesterton, seeing that she shivered, had suggested the library for waiting, where she said there was a fire, but Miss Entwistle preferred to be cold in the hall than warm in the library. And standing in that bleak place, she saw a line of firelight beneath the door, which she then knew must be the library. Accordingly, she then also knew that Lucy's bedroom was exactly above the library, for looking up she could see its door from where she stood, so that it was out the window. Her benevolence for a moment did become unsteady. He let the child sleep there. He made the child sleep there. She soon, however, had herself in hand again. Lucy didn't mind, so why should she? Lucy was asleep there at that moment, with a look of complete content on her face. But there was one thing Miss Entwistle decided she would do. Lucy shouldn't wake up by any chance in the night and find herself in that room alone, window or no window. She would sleep there with her. This was a really heroic decision, and only love for Lucy made it possible. Apart from the window, and what she believed had happened at it, apart from the way that poor thing's face in the photograph haunted her, there was the feeling that it wasn't Lucy's bedroom at all, but Everard's. It was oddly disagreeable to Miss Entwistle to spend the night For instance, with Weems's sponge. She debated in the spare room when she was getting ready for bed, a small room on the other side of the house, with a nice high windowsill, whether she wouldn't keep her clothes on. At least then she would feel more strange. At least she would feel less at home. But how tiring. At her age, if she sat up all night, and in her clothes no lying down could be comfortable, she would be the merest rag next morning, and quite unable to cope on the telephone with Everard. And she really must take out her hairpins. She couldn't sleep a wink with them all pressing on her head. Yet the familiarity of being in that room among the neckties without her hairpins. She hesitated and argued, and all the while she was slowly taking out her hairpins and taking off her clothes. At the last moment, when she was in her nightgown and her hair was neatly plaited, and she was looking the goodest of tidy little women, her courage failed her. No, she couldn't go. She would stay where she was, and ring and ask that nice housemaid to sleep with Mrs. Weems in case she wanted anything in the night. She did ring, but by the time Lizzie came, Miss Entwistle, doubting the sincerity of her motives, had been examining them. Was it really the neckties? Was it really the sponge? Wasn't it, at bottom, really the window? She was ashamed. Where Lucy could sleep, she could not. I rang, she said, to ask you to be so kind as to help me carry my pillow and blankets into Mrs. Weems's room. I'm going to sleep on the sofa there. Yes, ma'am, said Lizzie, picking them up. The sofa's very short. And aid, ma'am. Hadn't you better sleep in the bed? No, said Miss Entwistle. There's plenty of room, ma'am. Mrs. Weems wouldn't know you was in it. It's such a large bed. I will sleep on the sofa, said Miss Entwistle. End of the chapter. Is it me, or do a number of the passages involving Aunt Dot? They absolutely do. For sure, for sure. And it's so interesting and also very realistic that Aunt Dot is picking up on like something simmering, but explaining it away. And I feel like that happens a lot in real life. Yes, she's picking up the right vibes, but trying to convince herself otherwise. Exactly, exactly. And instead of actually talking to Lucy, she is explaining things for Lucy in her mind. Like, oh, well, Lucy clearly doesn't have an issue with the window in this bedroom or staying in the same bedroom that Vera was in. So why should I? When in reality, Lucy absolutely has an issue with it and doesn't like it at all. You don't think it's supposed to be that way, but you can't explain it. Yes. Am I misremembering, or did she try to get closer to Weems early in the book? She did. Yes, because they are of similar age and they both lost someone very close to them. She did think that they would have been compatible. But that was, yeah, that was very quick and very brief. And I think Weems like tried really hard to shoulder it away so that it would just stop. Probably because Aunt Dot is picking up on all of these things. And because like she's not looking like a 12-year-old boy. There's this passage, the moment of her talking about Lucy and the young man in the house. Yes. Yep. I forgot about that again. Yes, you're totally right. It's Aunt Dot is both somebody that I'm trying so hard to root for and somebody where I'm just like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Why are you thinking this? So she is also a little frustrating, and I think a lot of the characters, I'm trying to think if there's a character that isn't frustrating. I don't think so. I think every character is frustrating for some reason or another. Yeah. All right. Lizzie, you're right. You're right. Yes, Lizzie is not that frustrating. Uh, and she's so new to working in the house too. Yeah, no, I think you're right, Noodles. And she also didn't work with the previous Mrs. Weems. So she doesn't have the comparison, whereas Chesterton does, which is interesting, for sure. All right, chapter 28. We are 80% of the way through. There's 33 chapters? 34 chapters? Let's see. 32 chapters. It's going the wrong way with the numbers. I think it's actually a realistic sketch of a woman stuck in a including Aunt Dot. Yes, relatives, friends are often unable to see, admit. Yes, I think you're right, Falcor. And it's really sad and scary that it is still the case today, for sure. All right, chapter 28. In London, Weems went through his usual day, except that he was kept longer than he liked at his office by the accumulation of business, and by having a prolonged difference of opinion, ending in dismissal, with a typist who had got out of hand during his absence to the extent of answering him back. It was 5 before he was able to leave, and even then he hadn't half finished, but he declined to be sacrificed further, and proceed, as usual, to his club to play bridge. He had a great desire for bridge after not having played it for so long, and it was difficult, doing exactly the things he had always done, for him to remember that he was married. In fact, he wouldn't have remembered if he hadn't felt so indignant, but all day underneath everything he did, everything he said and thought, lay indignation, and so he knew he was married. Being extremely methodical, he had long ago divided his life inside and out into compartments, each strictly separate, each, as it were, kept locked till the proper moment for its turn arrived. When he unlocked it and took out its contents, work, bridge, dinner, wife, sleep, Paddington, the Willows, or whatever it was that it contained. Having finished with the contents, the compartment was locked up and dismissed from his thoughts till its turn came round again. A honeymoon was a great shake-up, but when it occurred he arranged the date of its cessation at precisely as the date of its inauguration. On such a day, at such an hour, it would come to an end. The compartments would once more be unlocked, and regularity resumed. Bridge was the one activity which, though it was taken out of its compartment at the proper time, didn't go into it again with any sort of punctuality. Everything else, including his wife, was locked up to the minute. But bridge would stay out till any hour. On each of the days in London, the Mondays to Fridays, he proceeded punctually to his office, and from thence punctually to his club and bridge. He always lunched and dined at his club. Other men, he was aware, dined not infrequently at home, but the explanation of that was that their wives weren't Vera. The moment, then, that Weems found himself once more doing the usual things among the usual surroundings, he felt so exactly as he used to that he wouldn't have remembered Lucy at all if it hadn't been for that layer of indignation at the bottom of his mind. Going up the steps of his club, he was conscious of a sense of hard usage, and searching for its cause, remembered Lucy. His wife now wasn't Vera, and yet he was to dine at his club exactly as if she were. His wife was Lucy, who, instead of being where she ought to be, eagerly awaiting his return to Lancaster Gate, it was one of his legitimate grievances against Vera that she didn't eagerly await. She was having a cold at Strawarley. And why was she having a cold at Strawarley? And why was he, a newly married man, deprived of the comfort of his wife and going to spend the evening exactly as he had spent all the evenings for months past? Weems was very indignant, but he was also very desirous of bridge. If Lucy had been waiting for him, he would have had to leave off bridge before his desire, for it had been anything like sated. Whatever wives one had, they shackled one. And as it was, he could play as long as he wanted to, and yet at the same time remain justly indignant. Accordingly, he wasn't nearly as unhappy as he thought he was, not, at any rate, till the moment came for going solitary to bed. He detested sleeping by himself. Even Vera had always slept with him. Altogether, Weems felt that he had had a bad day, what with the disappointment of its beginning, and the extra work at the office, and no decent lunch, positively only time to snatch a bun and a glass of milk, he announced, amazed, to the first acquaintance he met at the club. Just fancy, only time to snatch. But the acquaintance had melted away and losing rather heavily at bridge, and going back to Lancaster Gate to find from the message left by Dwight that annoying aunt of Lucy's had cropped up already. Usually Weems was amused by Dwight's messages, but nothing about this one amused him. He threw down the wrong number one impatiently. Dwight was really a hopeless imbecile. He would dismiss him, but the other one he read again. Wanted to know all about us, did she? Said it was very strange, did she? Like her impertinence, he thought. She had lost no time in cropping up, he thought. Of how completely Miss Entwistle had, in fact, cropped up, he was sure. He was, of course, unaware. Yes, he had had a bad day, and he was going to have a lonely night. He went upstairs feeling deeply hurt and winding his watch. But after much solid sleep he felt better, and at breakfast he said to Dwight, who always jumped when he addressed him, "Mrs. Weems will be coming up today." Dwight's brain didn't work very fast, owing to the way it spent most of its time dormant in a basement, and for a moment he thought it startled him that his master had forgotten the lady was dead. Ought he to remind him? What a painful dilemma. However, he remembered the new Mrs. Weems just in time not to remind him, and to say, "Yes, sir," without too perceptible a pause. His mind hadn't room in it to contain much, and it assimilated slowly that which it contained. He had only been in Weems's service 3 months before the Mrs. Weems he found there dead. He was just beginning to assimilate her when she ceased to be assimilated. Assimilatable, there we go. And to him and his wife in their quiet, subterraneous existence, it had seemed as if not more than a week had passed before there was another Mrs. Weems. Far was it for him to pass opinions on the rapid marriages of gentlemen, but he couldn't keep up with these Mrs. Weemses. His mind, he found, hadn't yet really realized the new one. He knew she was there somewhere, for he had seen her briefly on the Saturday morning, and he knew she would presently begin to disturb him by needing meals, but he easily forgot her. He forgot her now, and consequently, for a moment, had the dreadful thought described above. You're curious what Vera's family situation was. Oh, that is interesting. Yes, and very predatory, which we already knew that he was. But yeah, zero reference to her family at all. And, that is an interesting question because Aunt Dot is being, is cropping up at inconvenient times. It seems like he would have mentioned if Vera also had somebody who would crop up at inconvenient times, because he's comparing Lucy to Vera so much. I feel like if there was a relative who did that, he would compare Aunt Dot to whatever relative it was. Yes, exactly. She's being a normal, loving family member. So it is interesting. I am wondering if Vera was estranged for her family or didn't have a family. And he just doesn't know how to deal with somebody with a family who, like, can sometimes see what's happening and just getting in the way of his plans. Yeah, very interesting. That's a good point. He hunts for vulnerable outcasts. Yes, yes, yes. And cats. Any outdoor cats. "I shall be in to dinner," said Weems. "Yes, sir," said Dwight. Dinner. There usedn't to be dinner. His master hadn't been in once to dinner since Dwight knew him. A tray for the lady, while there was a lady. That was all. Mrs. Dwight could just manage a tray. Since the lady had left off coming up to town owing to her accident, there hadn't been anything. Only quiet. He stood waiting, not having been waved out of the room, and anxiously watching Weems's face, for he was a nervous man. Then the telephone bell rang. Weems, without looking up, waved him out to it and went on with his breakfast, and after a minute, noticing that he neither came back nor could be heard saying anything beyond a faint prop propit propitiatory propitiatory. Oh my gosh. Why can't I say this word? Words are hard. Propitiatory. That's gonna be. Let's just, yeah, I'll put it in chat. We might, here, we'll see if Nightbot can give us a definition too. Propitiatory? Did I spell it correctly? Yes, it's from propitiates. There we go, okay. Propitiate? Propitiatory. Hmm. That's the same definition that I got on my Kindle too. Yeah, designed or intended to propitiate, conciliatory, expiatory, win or regain the favor. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Let's see, we'll just start that sentence over. And after a minute, noticing that he neither came back nor could be heard saying anything beyond a faint propitiatory "Hello," called out to him. "What is it?" Weems called out. "I can't hear, sir," Dwight's distressed voice answered from the hall. "Fool," said Weems, appearing, table napkin in hand. "Yes, sir," said Dwight. He took the receiver from him, and then the Dwights, Mrs. Dwight from the foot of the kitchen stairs, and Dwight, lingering in the background because he hadn't yet been waved away, heard the following. "Yes, yes. Yes, speaking. Hello. Who is it? What? I can't hear. What? Miss who? And oh, good morning. How distant your voice sounds. What? Where? Where? Oh, really?" Here the person at the other end talked a great deal. "Yes, quite. But then you see she wasn't." More prolonged talk from the other end. "What? She isn't coming up?" "Indeed, she is. She's expected. I've ordered—" "What? I can't hear. The doctor." "You're sending for the doctor?" "I dare say. But then you see, I consider it isn't—" "I dare say, I dare say. No, of course, I can't. How can I leave my work?" "Oh, very well, very well. I dare say. No doubt. She's to come up for all that as arranged. Tell her. And if she needs doctors, there are more of them here anyhow than— What? Can't possibly. I suppose you know you're taking a great deal upon yourself, unasked. What? What? A very rapid, clear voice cut in. "Do you want another 3 minutes?" it asked. He hung up the receiver with violence. "Oh, damn that woman. Damn that woman," he said so loud that the Dwights shook like reeds to hear him. At the other end, Miss Entwistle was walking away lost in thought. Her position was thoroughly unpleasant. She disliked extraordinarily that she should at that moment contain an egg and some coffee which had once been Weems's. She would have breakfasted on a cup of tea only, if it hadn't been that Lucy was going to need looking after that day, and the looker after must be nourished. As she went upstairs again, a faint red spot on each cheek, she couldn't help being afraid that she and Everard would have to exercise patience before they got to be fond of each other. On the telephone, he hardly did himself justice, she thought. Lucy hadn't had a good night. She woke up suddenly from what was apparently a frightening dream soon after Miss Entwistle had composed herself on the sofa, and had been very restless and hot for a long time. There seemed to be a great many things about the room that she didn't like. One of them was the bed. Probably the poor little thing was bemused by her dream and her feverishness, but she said several things about the bed which showed that it was on her mind. Miss Entwistle had warmed some milk on a spirit lamp provided by Lizzie, and had given it to her and soothed her and petted her. She didn't mention the window, for which Miss Entwhistle was thankful, but when first she woke up from her frightening dream and her aunt hurried across to her, she had stared at her and actually called her Everard. Her, in her meek the hair, not like the dinner plates. When this happened, Miss Entwhistle made up her mind that the doctor should be sent for the first thing in the morning. About six she tumbled into an uncomfortable sleep again, and Miss Entwhistle crept out of the room and dressed. Certainly she was going to have a doctor round, and hear what he had to say, and as soon as she was strengthened by breakfast, she would do her duty and telephone to Everard. The chaos is on the horizon. Yeah, they're just building up, building. So much tension. This she did, with the result that she returned to Lucy's room with a little red spot on each cheek, and when she looked at Lucy, still uneasily sleeping and breathing as though her chest were all sore, the idea that she was to get up and travel to London made the red spots on Miss Entwhistle's cheeks burn brighter. She calmed down, however, on remembering that Everard couldn't see how evidently poorly the child was, and told herself that if he could, he would be all tenderness. She told herself this, but she didn't believe it. And then she was vexed that she didn't believe it. Lucy loved him. Lucy had looked perfectly pleased and content yesterday before she became so ill. One mustn't judge a man by his way with a telephone. At 10 o'clock, the doctor came. He had been in Strorley for years and was its only doctor. He was one of those guests who used to dine at the Willows in the early days of Weems's possession of it. Occasionally he had attended the late Mrs. Weems, and the last time he had been in the house was when he was sent for suddenly on the day of her death. Come on, Dot. So many signs, Dot, come on. He, in common with the rest of Strorley, had heard of Weems's second marriage, and he shared the general shocked surprise. Strorley, which looked such an unconscious place, such a torpid, unconscious riverside place, was nevertheless intensely sensitive to shocks, and it hadn't at all recovered from the shock of that poor Mrs. Weems's death, and the very dreadful inquest, when the fresh shock of another Mrs. Weems arriving on the scene made it, as it were, real anew, and made it real worse. Marriage so quickly on the heels of that terrible death. The Weemses were only weekenders and summer holiday people, so that it wasn't quite so scandalous to have them in Strorley as it would have been if they were unintermittent residents, yet it was serious enough. That inquest had been in all the newspapers. To have a house in one's midst which produced doubtful coroner's verdicts was a blot on any place, and the new Mrs. Weems couldn't possibly be anything but thoroughly undesirable. Of course, no one would call on her. Impossible. And when the doctor was rung up and asked to come round, he didn't tell his wife where he was going, because he didn't wish for trouble. Chesterton. How well he remembered Chesterton. But after all, it was only the other day that he was there last, ushered him into the library, and he was standing gloomily in front of the empty grate, looking neither to the right nor to the left, for he disliked the memories connected with the flags outside the window, and wishing he had a partner, because then he would have him sent there instead, with a spare little lady, bland and pleasant, came in and said she was the patient's aunt. An educated little lady, not at all the sort of relative he would have expected the new Mrs. Weems to have. There was a general conviction in Strorley that the new Mrs. Weems must have been a barmaid, a typist, or a nursery governess. Was, that is, either very bold, very poor, or very meek. Else how could she have married Weems? And this conviction had reached and infected even the doctor, who was a busy man off whom gossip usually slid. When, however, he saw Miss Entwhistle, he at once was sure that there was nothing in it. This wasn't the aunt for either the bold, the poor, or the meek. This was just a decent gentlewoman. He shook hands with her, really pleased to see her. Everybody was always pleased to see Miss Entwistle, except Weems. "Nothing serious, I hope?" asked the doctor. Miss Entwistle said she didn't think there was, but that her nephew— You mean Mr. Weems?" She bowed her head. She did mean Mr. Weems. Her nephew. Her nephew, that is, by marriage. "Quite," said the doctor. Her nephew naturally wanted his wife to go up and join him in London. "Naturally," said the doctor. "And she wanted to know when she would be fit to go." "Then let us go upstairs, and I'll tell you," said the doctor. This was a very pleasant little lady, he thought as he followed her up the well-known stairs. To have become related to Weems immediately on the top of all that affair. Now he would have said himself that after such a ghastly thing as that most women— But here they arrived in the bedroom, and his sentence remained unfinished, because on seeing the small head on the pillow of the treble bed, he thought, "Why, he's married a child. What an extraordinary thing." How old is she?" he asked Miss Entwistle, for Lucy was still uneasily sleeping, and when she told him, he was surprised. "It's because she's out of proportion to the bed," explained Miss Entwistle in a whisper. "She doesn't usually look so inconspicuous." The whispering and being looked at woke Lucy, and the doctor sat down beside her and got to business. The result was that Miss Entwistle was what Miss Entwistle expected. She had a very violent, feverish cold, which might turn into anything if she were not kept in bed. If she were, and with proper looking after, she would be all right in a few days. He laughed at the idea of London. "How did you come to get such a violent chill?" he asked Lucy. "I don't know," she answered. "Well, don't talk," he said, laying her hand down on the quilt. He had been holding it while his sharp eyes watched her, and giving it a brief pat of farewell. "Just lie there and get better. I'll send something for your throat, and I'll look in again tomorrow." Miss Entwistle went downstairs with him, feeling as if she had buckled him on it as a shield, and would be able, clad in such armor, to face anything Everard might say. "She likes that room?" he asked, abruptly, pausing a moment in the hall. "I can't quite make out," said Miss Entwistle. "We haven't had any talk at all yet. It was from that window, wasn't it, that—" "No. The one above." "The one above? Oh, really?" "Yes. There's a sitting room. But I was thinking whether being in the same bed— Well, goodbye. Cheer her up. She'll want it when she's better. She'll feel weak. I'll be round tomorrow." He went out, pulling on his gloves, followed to the steps by Miss Entwistle. On the steps he paused again. "How does she like being here?" he asked. "I don't know," said Miss Entwistle. We haven't talked at all yet." She looked at him a moment, and then added, "She's very much in love." "Ah, yes. Really. I see. Well, goodbye." He turned to go. "It's wonderful, wonderful," he said, pausing once more. "What is wonderful?" "What love will do." "It is indeed," agreed Miss Entwistle, thinking of all it had done to Lucy. He seemed as if he were going to say something more, but thought better of it, and climbed into his dog-cart, and was driven off. End of chapter 28. Okay, I know I'm crazy. This will not be the case, but Ricin causes flu-like symptoms such as cough, weakness, fever, nausea, muscle ache, and difficulty breathing. You're not crazy. I do. Well, and like all of this like stress and everything that she's going over is totally compounding as well. And so like whatever is, I'm sure she's sick, like for real sick, whether she's poisoned or whether it was because she was outside, but or a combination of both. And I think her stress and her shock and her not wanting to be around Weems is also just making it worse. We'll see. We'll see. Okay. Chapter 29. We are 84% through. One more sip. Here we go. Sorry, my lips are chapped. I did like a scrub today. So it also tastes a little bit like sugar cookies, but it's fine. Chapter 29. 2 days went by, undisturbed by the least manifestation from Weems. Miss Entwistle wrote to him on each of the afternoons, telling him of Lucy's progress and of what the doctor said about her, and on each of the evenings she lay down on the sofa to sleep feeling excessively insecure for how very likely that he would come down by some late rain and walk in, and then there she would be. In spite of that, she would have been very glad if he had walked in. It would have seemed more natural, and she couldn't help wondering whether the little thing in the bed wasn't thinking so too. But nothing happened. He didn't come. He didn't write. He made no sign of any sort. Curious, said Miss Entwistle to herself, and forbore to criticize further. Your lips are always super chapped while eating. Yes. Always. Always. They were peaceful days. Lucy was getting better all the time, though still kept carefully in bed by the doctor, and Miss Entwistle felt as much justified in being in the house as Chesterton or Lizzie, for she was performing duties under the doctor's directions. Also, the weather was quiet and sunshiny. In fact, there was peace. On Thursday, the doctor said Lucy might get up for a few hours and sit on the sofa, and there, its asperities softened by pillows, she sat and had tea, and through the open window came the sweet smells of April. The gardener was mowing the lawn, and one of the smells was of the cut grass. Miss Entwistle had been out for a walk and found some what? Miss Entwistle was out for a walk and found some windflowers and some lovely bright green moss and put them in a bowl. The doctor had brought a little bunch of violets out of his garden. The afternoon sun lay beautifully on the hills across the river. The river slid past the end of the garden tranquilly, and Miss Entwistle, pouring out Lucy's tea and buttering her toast, felt that she could, at that moment, very nearly have been happy, in spite of its being the willows she was in, if there hadn't, in the background, brooding over her day and night, been that very odd and disquieting silence of Everard's. As if Lucy knew what she was thinking, she said, it was the first time she had talked of him. You know, Aunt Dot, Everard will have been fearfully busy this week because of having been away so long. Oh, of course, agreed Miss Entwistle, with much heartiness. I'm sure the poor dear has been run off his legs. He hasn't. Lucy flushed and broke off. I suppose, she began again after a minute, there's been nothing from him? No messages, I mean, on the telephone or anything? I don't think there has. Not since our talk the first day, said Miss Entwistle. Oh, did he telephone the first day? Asked Lucy quickly. You never told me. You were asleep nearly all day. Yes, said Miss Entwistle, clearing her throat. We had quite a little talk. What did he say? Well, he naturally wanted you to be well enough to go up to London, and of course he was very sorry you couldn't. Lucy looked suddenly much happier. Yes, said Miss Entwistle, as though in answer to the look. He hates writing letters, you know, Aunt Dot, Lucy said presently. Men do, said Miss Entwistle. It's very curious, she continued brightly, but men do. And he hates telephoning. It was wonderful for him to have telephoned that day. Men, said Miss Entwistle, are very funny about some things. Today is Thursday, isn't it? Said Lucy. He ought to be here by 1 o'clock tomorrow. Miss Entwistle started. Tomorrow, she repeated. Really? Does he? I mean, ought he? Somehow I had supposed Saturday. The weekend somehow suggests Saturdays to me. No, we, Lucy corrected herself, come down on Fridays. He's sure to be down in time for lunch. Oh, is he? Said Miss Entwistle, thinking a great many things very quickly. Well, if it is his habit, she went on, I am sure, too, that he will. Do you remember how we set our clocks by him when he came to tea at Eaton Terrace? Lucy smiled, and the remembrance of those days, of love, and of all his dear, funny ways flooded her heart and washed out, for a moment, the honeymoon, the birthday, everything that had happened since. Miss Entwistle couldn't but notice the unmistakable love look. Oh, I'm so glad you love each other so much, she said with all her heart. You know, Lucy, I was afraid that perhaps this house... She stopped, because adequately to discuss the Willows in all its aspects needed, she felt perfect health on both sides. Yes, I don't think a house matters when people love each other, said Lucy. Not a bit, not a bit, agreed Miss Entwistle. Not even, she thought robustly, when it was a house with a recent dreadful history. Love, she hadn't herself experienced it, but what an imagination for except to imagine with. Love was so strong in armor that nothing could reach one and hurt one through it. That was why lovers were so selfish. They sat together inside their armor perfectly safe, entirely untouchable, completely uninterested in what happened to the rest of the world. Besides, she went on loudly, you'll alter it. Oh, hey, Infant Gamer. I'm doing all right. How are you doing? Happy Tuesday. Lucy's smile at that was a little sickly. Aunt Dot's optimism seemed to her extravagant. She was unable to see herself altering the Willows. You'll have all your father's furniture and books to put about, said Aunt Dot, continuing in optimism. Why, you'll be able to make the place really quite... She was going to say habitable, but ate another piece of toast instead. Yes, I expect I'll have the books here anyhow, said Lucy. There's a sitting room upstairs with room in there. Oh, is there? Said Miss Entwistle, suddenly very attentive. Lots of room. It's to be my sitting room, and the books could go there, except that... Except what? Asked Miss Entwistle. I don't know. I don't much want to alter that room. It was Vera's. I should alter it beyond recognition, said Miss Entwistle firmly. Lucy was silent. She felt too flabby, after her 3 days with a temperature, to engage in discussion with anybody firm. That's to say, said Miss Entwistle, if you like having the room at all. I should have thought... Oh, yes, I like having the room, said Lucy, flushing. Then it was Miss Entwistle who was silent, and she was silent because she didn't believe Lucy really could like having the actual room from which that unfortunate Vera met her death. It wasn't natural. She needed feeding up. Perhaps they had better not talk about rooms, not till Lucy was stronger. Perhaps they had better not talk at all, because everything they said was bound in the circumstances to lead either to Everard or Vera. Would you like me to read aloud to you a little while... We're going to start that question over. Wouldn't you like me to read aloud to you a little while before you go back to bed? She asked when Lizzie came in to clear away the tea things. Lucy thought this was a very good idea. Oh, do, Aunt Dot, she said, for she was too afraid of what talking might lead to. Aunt Dot was phenomenally quick. Lucy felt she couldn't bear it. She simply couldn't bear it if Aunt Dot were to think that perhaps Everard... So she said quite eagerly, Oh, do, Aunt Dot. And not until she had said it did she remember that the books were locked up, and the key was on Everard's watch chain. Then she sat looking up at Aunt Dot with a startled, conscience-stricken face. What is it, Lucy? Asked Miss Entwistle, wondering why she had turned red. Just in time Lucy remembered that there were Vera's books. Do you mind very much going up to the sitting room? She asked. Vera's books... Miss Entwistle did mind very much going up to the sitting room, and saw no reason why Vera's books should be chosen. Why should she have to read Vera's books? Why did Lucy want those? And look so odd and guilty about it. Certainly the child needed feeding up. It wasn't natural. It was unwholesome, this odd attraction she appeared to feel towards Vera. She didn't say anything of this, but remarked that there was a room called the library in the house which suggested books, and hadn't she better choose something from out of that? Go down instead of going up? Lucy, painfully flushed, looked at her. Nothing would induce her to tell her about the key. Aunt Dot would think it so ridiculous. Yes, but Everard, she stammered, they're rather special books. He doesn't like them taken out of the room. Oh, said Miss Entwistle, trying hard to avoid any opinion of any sort. But I don't see why you should go up all those stairs, Aunt Dot, darling, Lucy went on. Lizzie will, won't you, Lizzie? Bring down some of the books, any of them, an armful. Lizzie, thus given carte blanche, brought down the 6 first books from the top shelf and set them on the table beside Lucy. Lucy recognized the cover of one of them at once. It was Wuthering Heights. Miss Entwistle took it up, read its title in silence, and put it down again. The next one was Emily Bronte's collected poems. Miss Entwistle took it up, read its title in silence, and put it down. The third one was Thomas Hardy's Time's Laughingstocks. Miss Entwistle took it up, read its title in silence, and put it down. The other 3 were Baedeker's. Well, I don't think there's anything I want to read here, she said. Lizzie asked if she should take them away then, and bring some more, and presently she reappeared with another armful. These were all Baedeker's. Curious, said Miss Entwistle. Then Lucy remembered that she, too, beneath her distress on Saturday, when she pulled out one after the other of Vera's books in her haste to understand her, to get comfort, to get, almost she hoped, console, had felt surprised at the number of Baedeker's. The greater proportion of the books in Vera's shelves were guidebooks and timetables, but there had been other things. If you were to bring some out of a different part of the bookcase, she suggested to Lizzie, who thereupon removed the Baedekers and presently reappeared with more books. This time they were miscellaneous, and Miss Entwistle turned them over with a kind of reverential reluctance. The poor thing. This day last year she was probably reading them herself. It seemed sacrilege for 2 strangers. Merciful that one couldn't see into the future. What would the poor creature have thought of the picture presented at that moment? The figure in the blue dressing gown sitting in the middle of all the things that had been hers such a very little while before. Well, perhaps she would have been glad they weren't hers any longer, glad that she had finished, was done with them. These books suggested such tiredness, such a wish for escape. There was more Hardy, all the poems this time in one volume. There was Pater, the child in the house, and the emerald Uthwart. Excuse me. Miss Entwistle, familiar with these, shook her head. That peculiar dwelling on death in them, that odd, fascinated inability to get away with it, that beautiful but sick wistfulness. No, she certainly wouldn't read these. There was a book called In the Strange South Seas, and another about some island in the Pacific, and another about life in the desert, and 1 or 2 others, more of the flamboyant guidebook order, describing remote, glowing places. Suddenly Miss Entwistle felt uncomfortable. She put down the book she was holding, and folded her hands in her lap, and gazed out of the window at the hills on the other side of the river. She felt as if she had been prying, and prying unpardonably. The books people read. Was there ever anything more revealing? No. She refused to examine Vera's books further. And apart from that horrible feeling of prying upon somebody's defenseless, upon somebody pitiful, She didn't wish to allow the thought these books suggested to get any sort of hold on her mind. It was essential, absolutely essential, that it shouldn't. And if Lucy ever... She got up and went to the window. Lucy's eyes followed her, puzzled. The gardener was still mowing the lawn, working very hard at it, as though he were working against time. She watched his back, bent with hurry as he and the boy laboriously pushed and pulled the machine up and down, and then she caught sight of the terrace just below, and the flags. This was a dreadful house. Whichever way one looked, one was entangled in a reminder. She turned away quickly, and there was that little loved thing in her blue wrapper, propped up on Vera's pillows, watching her with puzzled anxiety. Nothing could harm that child. She was safe, so long as she loved and believed in Everard. But suppose someday, suppose gradually, suppose a doubt should creep into her mind whether perhaps, after all, Vera's fall. Suppose a question should get into her head whether perhaps, after all, Vera's death. Aunt Dot knew Lucy's face so well that it seemed absurd to examine it now, searching for signs in its features and expression of enough character, enough nerves, enough... This is where... This, if there were enough of it, might be itself carry her sense of humor. Yes, she had a beautiful sweep of forehead. All that part of her face was lovely, so calm and open with intelligent, sweet eyes. But were those dear eyes intelligent enough? Was not sweetness really far more manifest in them than intelligence? After that, her face went small. And then, looking bigger than it was because of her little face, was her kind, funny mouth. Generous, easily forgiving, quick to be happy, quick to despair. Aunt Dot, looking anxiously at it, thought she saw all this in the shape of Lucy's mouth. But had the child strength? Had she the strength that would be needed equally, supposing that doubt and that question should ever get into her head, for staying or for going, for staying or for running? Oh, but running, running for her very life. With a violent effort, Miss Entwistle shook herself free from these thoughts. Where in heaven's name was her mind wandering to? It was intolerable, this tyranny of suggestion in everything one looked at here, in everything one touched. And Lucy, who was watching her and who couldn't imagine why Aunt Dot should be so steadfastly gazing at her mouth, naturally asked, "Is anything the matter with my face?" Then Miss Entwistle managed to smile and came and sat down again beside the sofa. "No," she said, taking her hand, "but I don't think I want to read after all. Let us talk." And holding Lucy's hand, who looked a little afraid at first, but soon grew content on finding what the talk was to be about, she proceeded to discuss supper, and whether a poached egg or a cup of beef tea contained the greater amount of nourishment. End of chapter 29. So, I'm totally the person, if I go to somebody's house, will look at their books, and I am just interested in what people read. But it is interesting that you can, like, ascertain people's tastes in the books that they keep, and seeing just the types of books that Vera keeps is real cool. Chapter 29, not these books. hmm And also seeing if people actually read their books. I do that as well. Like, are the spines cracked? Did you read this book, or did you just pick it up because you think it makes you cool? Did you actually read House of Leaves? Or did you just hear that smart people read it and it's just on your shelf? Noodles. Don't feel targeted. I have plenty of books that I on my shelf that I haven't read. Once you went on a date and they had no books on their shelf, and I knew it was not meant to be. Red flag, no books. I have not read every book I own. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I actually have them written down, the books that I haven't read that are just sitting on my shelf. And when I have downtime, which isn't often, then well, downtime in like my reading schedule, then I pick so I can read something. You have tons of ghost lore books. They absolutely count. Of course they count. Infinite Jest sits there and laughs at me. I have a lot of books that are just mocking me, and yet I continue to not read it and just get something else. A chunk of your books are those nice Barnes and Noble classic covers. Yes. The print is insanely tiny. Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. It is very small. And those books are so pretty too. I'm also the type of person who tries to read a book without breaking the spine. I don't know why, but like paperbacks, I like read them like this. I don't like actually like bend it. I don't know why. All right. Chapter 30. You roughhouse your books. Totally cool. They're well loved. They're well loved. You're the type who will have a book on the shelf and then read it. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Okay, chapter 30. We're 87% through, which is not a real indication of where we are. But we're close. There's 30. Oh my gosh, I like immediately forget. There's 32 chapters. We only have 3 chapters left. Are we scared? Because I'm scared. What's going to happen to these characters? I'm worried. Okay, chapter 30. You're totally right. X% of the back is not always really, yeah. Also, she presently told her, approaching it with caution, for she was sure Lucy wouldn't like it, that as Everard was coming down next day, she thought it better to go back to Eden Terrace in the morning. You two lovebirds won't want me, she said gaily, expecting and prepared for opposition, but really, as the child was getting well so quickly, there was no reason why she and Everard should be forced to begin practicing affection for each other here and now. Besides, in the small bag she brought there had only been a nightgown and her washing things, and she couldn't go on much longer on only that. To her surprise, Lucy not only agreed, but looked relieved. Miss Entwistle was greatly surprised, and also greatly pleased. She adores him, she thought, and only wants to be alone with him. If Everard makes her as happy as all that, who cares what he is like to me or to anybody else in the world? Red flag. And all the horrible, ridiculous things she had been thinking half an hour before were blown away like so many cobwebs. Just before 7:30, while she was in her room on the other day, on the other side of the house, tidying herself before facing Chesterton and the evening meal, she had reduced it to the merest skeleton of a meal, but Chesterton insisted on waiting, and all the usual ceremonies were observed. She was startled by the sound of wheels on the gravel beneath the window. It could only be Everard. He had come. Oh, dear me, said Miss Entwistle to herself, and she who had planned it to be gone so neatly before his arrival. It would be idle to pretend that she wasn't very much perturbed. She was, and the brush with which she was tidying her pretty gray hair shook in her hand. Dinner alone with Everard. Well, at least let her be thankful that he hadn't arrived a few minutes later and found her actually sitting in his chair. What would have happened if he had? Miss Entwistle, for all her dismay, couldn't help laughing. Also, she encouraged herself for the encounter by remembering the doctor. Behind his authority, she was secure. She had developed, since Tuesday, from an uninvited visitor into an indispensable adjunct. Not a nurse. Lucy hadn't at any moment been positively ill enough for a nurse, but an adjunct. She listened, her brush suspended. There was no mistaking it. It was certainly Everard, for she heard his voice. The wheels of the cab, after the interval necessary for ejecting him, turned round again on the drive, crunching much less, and went away, and presently there was his well-known, deliberate, heavy tread coming up the uncarpeted staircase. Thank God for bedrooms, thought Miss Entwistle, fervently brushing. Where would one be without them? And bathrooms, places of legitimate lockings in, places even the most indignant host was bound to respect. Now, this wasn't the proper spirit in which to go down and begin getting fond of Everard, and giving him the opportunity of getting fond of her, as she herself presently saw. Besides, at that very moment Lucy was probably in his arms, all alight with joyful surprise, and if he could make Lucy so happy, there must be enough of good in him to enable him to fulfill the very wild requirements of Lucy's aunt. Just bare pleasantness, bare decency would be enough. She stoutly assured herself of her certainty of being fond of Everard, if only he would let her. Sufficiently fond of him, that is. She didn't suppose any affection she was going to feel for him would ever be likely to get the better for her reason. Literally ejecting. Just push a button, out he flies. He deserves it. Immediately on Weems's arrival, the silent house had burst into feverish life. Doors banged, feet ran, and now Lizzie came hurrying along the passage and knocked at the door and told her breathlessly that dinner would be later, not for at least another half-hour, because Mr. Weems had come unexpectedly, and the cook had to— She didn't finish the sentence. She was in such a hurry to be off. Miss Entwistle, her simple preparations being complete, had nothing left to do but sit in one of those wicker work chairs with thin, hard cretonne-covered upholstery. I don't know what that is. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but that's fine. Oops, I totally did it wrong. Oopsie poopsie. A strong, heavy fabric of cotton, linen, or rayon, used to make curtains and upholstery. Cool. Cretonne upholstery, which are sometimes found in inhospitable spare rooms, and weight. She found this bad for her morale. There wasn't a book in the room, or she would have distracted her thoughts by reading. She didn't want dinner. She would have best liked to get into bed she hadn't yet slept once in, and stay there till it was time to go home. But her pride blushed scarlet at such a cowardly desire. She arranged herself, therefore, in the chair, and, since she couldn't read, tried to remember something to say over to herself instead, some poem, or verse of a poem, to take her attention off the coming dinner. And she was shocked to find, as she sat there with her eyes shut to keep out the light that glared on her from the middle of the ceiling, that she could remember nothing but fragments, loose bits floating derelict round her mind, broken spars that didn't even belong. She was afraid, to any really magnificent whole, how Jim would have scolded her. Jim, who forgot nothing that was beautiful. By nature cool, in pious habits bred, she looked on husbands with a virgin's dread. Now where did that come from? And why should it come at all? Such was the tone and manners of them all. No married lady at the house would call. And that, for instance, she couldn't remember ever having read any poem that could contain these lines, yet she must have. She certainly hadn't invented them. And this, an absurd German thing Jim used to quote and laugh at. Der Sultan winkt, Zulkeit schweckt, und seit sich sanschlich abgenet. That is terrible German for you. You're welcome. Why should a thing like that rise now to the surface of her mind and float round on it while all the noble verse she had read and enjoyed, which would have been of such use and support to her at this juncture, was nowhere to be found? Not a shred of it, in any corner of her brain. Yeah, sure. What a brain. thought Miss Entwistle, disgusted, sitting up very straight in the wickerwork chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes shut. What a contemptible, anemic brain, deserting her like this, only able to throw up to the surface when stirred, out of all the store of splendid stuff put so assiduously into it during years and years of life. Couplets. A sound she hadn't yet heard began to crawl around the house, and, even while she wondered what it was, increased and increased, till it seemed to her at last that it must fill the universe and reach to Eaton Terrace. It was that gong. Become active. Heavens, what activity? She listened amazed. The time it went on. It went on and on, beating in her ears like the crack of doom. When the 3 great final strokes were succeeded by silence, she got up from her chair. The moment had come. A last couplet floated through her brain. Her brain seemed to clutch at it. Betwixt the stirrup and the ground, she mercy sought, she mercy found. Now where did that one come from? She asked herself distractedly, nervously passing one hand over her already perfectly tidy hair and opening the door with the other. There was Weems, opening Lucy's door at the same moment. "Oh, how do you do, Everard?" said Miss Entwistle, advancing with all the precipitate and affectionate politeness of one who is greeting not only a host, but a nephew. "Quite well, thank you," was Everard's slightly unexpected reply, but logical. Perfectly logical. She held out her hand and he shook it, and then proceeded past her to her bedroom, which she had left open, and switched off the light, which she had left on. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Miss Entwistle. That, she thought, is one to Everard. She waited for his return and then walked, followed by him in silence down the stairs. "How do you find Lucy?" she asked when they had got to the bottom. She didn't like Everard's silences. She remembered several of them during that difference of opinion he and she had had about where Christmas should be spent. They weighed on her, and she had the sensation of wriggling beneath them like an earwig beneath a stone, and it humiliated her to wriggle. "Just as I expected," he said. "Perfectly well." "Oh, no, not perfectly well," exclaimed Miss Entwistle, a vision of the blue-wrapped little figure sitting weakly up against the pillows that afternoon before her eyes. "She is better today, but not nearly well." "You asked me what I thought, and I've told you," said Weems. No, it wouldn't be an impulse affection, hers and Everard's, she felt. It would, when it did come, be the result of slow and careful preparation, line upon line, here a little and there a little. "Won't you go in?" he asked, and she perceived he had pushed the dining-room door open and was holding it back with his arm while she, thinking this, lingered. That, she thought, is another to Everard, her second bungle. First, the light left on in her room, now keeping him waiting. She hurried through the door, and then, vexed with herself for hurrying, walked to her chair with almost an excess of deliberation. "The doctor," she began, when they were in their places and the Chesterton was hovering in readiness to snatch the cover off the soup the instant Weems had finished arranging his table napkin. "I wish to hear nothing about the doctor," he interrupted. Miss Entwistle gave herself pains to be undaunted, and said with almost an excess of naturalness, "But I'd like to tell you." "It is no concern of mine," he said. "But you're her husband, you know," said Miss Entwistle, trying to sound pleasant. "I gave no orders," said Weems. "But he had to be sent for. The child—" "So you say. So you said on the phone. And I told you then you were taking a great deal on yourself unasked." Miss Entwistle hadn't supposed that anyone ever talked like this before servants. She now knew that she had been mistaken. "He's your doctor," said Weems. "My doctor? I regard him entirely as your doctor." "I wish, Everard," said Miss Entwistle politely after a pause, "that I understood." "You sent for him on your own responsibility, unasked. You must take the consequences." "I don't know what you mean by the consequences," said Miss Entwistle, who was getting further and further away from that beginning of affection for Everard to which she had embraced herself. "The bill," said Weems. "Oh," said Miss Entwistle. She was so much surprised that she could only ejaculate just that. Then the idea that she was in the act of being nourished by Weems's soup seemed to her so disagreeable that she put down the soup. "Certainly, if you wish it," she said. "I do," said Weems. The conversation flagged. Presently, sitting up very straight, refusing to take any notice of the variety and speed of the thoughts rushing around inside her and determined to behave as if she weren't minding anything, she said in a very clear little voice which she strove to make sound pleasant, "Did you have a good journey down?" "No," said Weems, waving the soup away. This as an answer, though no doubt strictly truthful, was too bald for much to be done with it. Miss Entwistle therefore merely echoed, as she herself felt foolishly, "No," and Weems confirmed his first reply by once more saying, "No." The conversation flagged. "I suppose," she then said, making another effort, "the train was very full." As this was not a question, he was silent and allowed her to suppose. The conversation flagged. "Why is there no fish?" he asked Chesterton, who was offering him cutlets. "There was no time to get any, sir," said Chesterton. He might have known that, thought Miss Entwistle. "You will tell the cook that I consider I have not dined unless there is fish." "Yes, sir," said Chesterton. "Goose," thought Miss Entwistle. It was easier and far less nerve-wracking to regard him indulgently as a goose than to let oneself get angry. He was like a little cross schoolboy, she thought, sitting there, being rude, but unfortunately a schoolboy with power. I am deeply uncomfortable, Falcor. Yes. Noodles, absolutely. He ate the cutlets in silence. Miss Entwistle declined them. She had missed her chance, she thought, when the cab was beneath her window, and all she had to do was to lean out and say, "Wait a minute." But then Lucy. Ah, yes, Lucy. The minute she thought of Lucy, she felt she absolutely must be friends with Everard. Incredible as it seemed to her, and always had seemed from the first, that Lucy should love him, there it was. She did. It couldn't be possible to love him without any reason. Of course not. The child knew. The child was wise and tender. Therefore, Miss Entwistle made another attempt at resuscitating conversation, watching her opportunity when Chesterton's back was receding down the room towards the outstretched arm at the end, for she didn't mind what Weems said quite so acutely if Chesterton wasn't looking. She said was as natural a voice as she could manage. "I'm very glad you've come, you know. I'm sure Lucy has been missing you very much." "Lucy can speak for herself," he said. Then Miss Entwistle concluded that conversation with Everard was too difficult. Let it flag. She couldn't, whatever he might be able to do, say anything that wasn't polite in the presence of Chesterton. She doubted whether, even if Chesterton were not there, she would be able to, and yet continued politeness appeared in the face of his answers impossible. She had best be silent, she decided, though to withdraw into silence was of itself a humiliating defeat. When she was little, Miss Entwistle used to be rude. Between the ages of 5 and 10, she frequently made faces at people. But not since then. 10 was the latest. After that, good manners descended upon her, and had enveloped her ever since. Nor had any occasion risen later in her life in which she had even been tempted to slough them. Urbane herself, she dwelt among urbanites, kindly. She everywhere met kindliness. But she did feel now that it might, if only she could so far forget herself, afford her solace were she able to say straight at him, "Weems." Just that word. No more. For some reason she was dying to call him Weems. without any Mr. She was sure that if she might only say that one word straight at him, she would feel better, as much relieved as she did when she was little and made faces. Dreadful. Dreadful. She cast down her eyes, overwhelmed by the nature of her thoughts, and said, "No, thank you," to the pudding. Weems never made it past 10. Yeah, there's no excuse. Weems. It is clear, thought Weems, observing her silence and her refusal to eat, where Lucy gets her sulking from. No more words were spoken till, dinner being over, he gave the order for coffee in the library. "I'll go and say good night to Lucy," said Miss Entwistle as they got up. "You'll be so good as to do nothing of the sort," said Weems. "I beg your pardon?" inquired Miss Entwistle, not quite sure she could have heard right. At this point they were both just in front of Vera's portrait, on their way to the door, and she was looking at each of them, impartially strangling her smile. "I wish to speak to you in the library," said Weems. "But suppose I don't wish to be spoken to in the library," leapt to the tip of Miss Entwistle's tongue. There, however, was Chesterton, checking, calming. So she said instead, "Do." End of chapter 30. Only 2 more chapters. I don't know where this is going to go, and I am very nervous about this discussion they're going to have in the library. And because he won't allow Aunt Dot to go say hello or goodbye or goodnight or whatever to Lucy, it would be very easy for something to happen.
Mooog hype Moog slide Moog sip.
Long souls, thank you so much for the 8 months. Hello, welcome in. Glad you're staying around. um, so yeah, I think it would be so easy for something to happen to Aunt Dot and for Weems to just say that Aunt Dot had to leave and had to leave quickly to catch a train, and she didn't have time to say goodbye to Lucy. You know, Star, I don't know. I don't know why they can't just talk where they are. Because there's definitely going to be, like, Chesterton or Lizzie standing in the library too, so it's not like he wants privacy. I know, Falcor, I really don't want him to get hurt. I really don't want Aunt Dot to get hurt. I don't know, and I don't know how things are going to be wrapped up in 2 chapters. I don't understand. Impossible. I feel like there's a lot going on in these 2 chapters. Or a lot going on now that it's gonna take a lot in these 2 chapters to wrap up. Chapter 30. Oh boy. All right. Chapter 31. Oh, Longsoul's thank you for contributing to April's Sunday stream and also given treats to Lil Bean. He needs them. He's been nothing but good all day. All right. Chapter 31. She hadn't been into the library yet. She knew the dining room, the hall, the staircase, Lucy's bedroom, the spare room, the antlers, and the gong. But she didn't know the library. She had hoped to go away without knowing it. However, she was not to however, she was not to be permitted to. The newly lit wood fire blazed cheerfully when they went in, but its amiable light was immediately quenched by the electric light Weems switched on at the door. From the middle of the ceiling it poured down so strongly that Miss Entwistle wished she was brought her sunshade. The blinds were drawn, and there in front of the window was the table where Everard had sat writing. She remembered every word of Lucy's account of it on that July afternoon of Vera's death. It was now April. Still well over 3 months to the first anniversary of that dreadful day, and here he was married again. And to, of all people in the world, her Lucy. There were so many strong, robust-minded young women in the world, so many hardened widows, so many thick-skinned persons of mature years wanting a comfortable home, who wouldn't mind Everard because they wouldn't love him, and therefore wouldn't feel. Why should fate have ordered that? That it should just be her Lucy. No, she didn't like him. She couldn't like him. He might, and she hoped he was, be all Lucy said, be wonderful and wholesome and natural and all the rest of it, but if he didn't seem so to her, what, as far as she was concerned, was the good of it? The fact is that by the time Miss Entwistle got into the library, she was very angry. Me too, Aunt Dot. Me too. Even the politest worm, she said to herself, the most conciliatory, sensible worm, fully conscious that wisdom points to patience, will nevertheless turn on its niece's husband if trodden on too heavily. The way Weems had ordered her not to go up to Lucy, particularly enraging to Miss Entwistle, was the knowledge of her weak position, uninvited in his house. Weems, standing on the hearthrug in front of the blaze, filled his pipe. How well she knew that attitude and that action. How often she had seen both in her drawing room in London. And hadn't she been kind to him? Hadn't she always, when she was hostess and he was guest, been hospitable and courteous? No, she didn't like him. This guy's a dementor in disguise. He sucks all the happiness and joy out of those around him. Yes. She sat down in one of the immense chairs and had the disagreeable sensation that she was sitting down in Weems's hollowed out. The 2 little red spots were brightly on her cheekbones, had been there, indeed, ever since the beginning of dinner. Weems filled his pipe with his customary deliberation, saying nothing. I believe he's enjoying himself, flashed into her mind. Enjoying being in a temper and having me to bully. Well? She asked, suddenly unbearably irritated. Oh, it's no good taking that tone with me, he said, continuing carefully to fill his pipe. Really, Everard, she said, ashamed of him, but also ashamed of herself. She oughtn't to have let go her grip on herself and said, well, with such obvious irritation. The coffee came. No, thank you, said Miss Entwistle. He helped himself. The coffee went. Perhaps, said Miss Entwistle in a very polite voice when the door had been shut by Chesterton, you'll tell me what it is you wish to say. Certainly. One thing is that I've ordered the cab to come round for you tomorrow, in time for the early train. Oh, thank you, Everard. That is most thoughtful, said Miss Entwistle. I have already told Lucy, when she said you would be down tomorrow, that I should be going home early. That's one thing, said Weems, taking no notice of this and going on carefully filling his pipe. The other is that I don't wish you to see Lucy again, either tonight or before you go. She looked at him in astonishment. But why not? She asked. I'm not going to have her upset. But my dear Everard, don't you see it will upset her much more if I don't say goodbye to her? It won't upset her at all if I do, because she knows I'm going tomorrow anyhow. Why, what would the child think? Oblige me by allowing me to be the best judge of my own affairs. Do you know that I very much doubt if you're that, said Miss Entwistle, earnestly, really moved by his inability to perceive consequences. Here he had got everything to make him happy for the rest of his life. The wife he loved, adoring him, believing in him, blotting out by her mere marrying him every doubt as to the exact manner of Vera's death, and all he had to do was to be kind and ordinarily decent. And poor Everard. It was absurd of her to mind for him, but she did, in fact, at that moment mind for him. He seemed such a pathetic human being, blindly bent on ruining his own happiness, would spoil it all, inevitably smash it all sooner or later, if he wasn't able to see, wasn't able to understand. Weems considered her remark so impertinent that he felt he would have been amply justified in requesting her to leave his house then and there, dark or no dark, train or no train. And so he would have done, if he hadn't happened to prefer a long rather than a short scene. "I didn't ask you into my library to hear your opinion of my character," he said, lighting his pipe. "Well then," said Miss Entwistle, for there was too much at stake for her to allow herself either to be silenced or goaded. "Let me tell you a few things about Lucy's." "About Lucy's?" echoed Weems, amazed at such effrontery. "About my wife's?" "Yes," said Miss Entwistle, very earnestly. "It's the sort of character that takes things to heart. And she'll be miserable, miserable, Everard, and worry if I just disappear as you wish me to without a word. Of course I'll go. And I promise I'll never come again unless you ask me to. But don't, because you're angry, insist on something that will make Lucy extraordinarily unhappy. Let me say good night to her now, and goodbye tomorrow morning. I tell you she'll be terribly worried if I don't. She'll think—" Miss Entwistle tried to smile, "that you've turned me out. And then, you see, if she thinks that, she won't be able—" Miss Entwistle hesitated. "Well, she won't be able to be proud of you. And that, my dear Everard—" She looked at him with a faint smile of deprecation and apology that she, a spinster, should talk of this. "Gives love its deepest wound." Weems stared at her, too much amazed to speak. In his house. In his own house. "I'm sorry," she said, still more earnestly, "if this annoys you, but I really do think it is very important." There was then a long silence, during which they looked at each other. He at her in amazement, she at him trying to hope that he would take what she had said in good part. It was so vital that he should understand, that he should get an idea of the effect on Lucy of just that sort of unkind, even cruel behavior. His own happiness was involved as well. Tragic for everyone if he couldn't be got to see. "Are you aware," he said, "that this is my house?" "Oh, Everard," she said at that, with a moment of despair. "Are you aware," he continued, "that you are talking to a husband of his wife?" Miss Entwistle said nothing, but leaning her head on her hand, looked at the fire. "Are you aware that you thrust yourself into my house uninvited, directly my back was turned, and having been living in it, and would have gone on indefinitely living in it, without any sanction from me unless I had come down, as I did come down, on purpose to put an end to such an outrageous state of affairs?" "Of course," she said, "that is one way of describing it. It is the way of every reasonable and decent person," said Weems. "Oh, no," said Miss Entwistle, "that is precisely what it isn't. But," she added, getting up from the chair and holding out her hand, "it is your way, and so I think, Everard, I'll say good night, and goodbye, too, for I don't expect I'll see you in the morning." "One would suppose," he said, taking no notice of her proffered hand, for he hadn't nearly done, "from your tone that this was your house, and I was your servant." I assure you, I could never imagine it to be my house, or you my servant." "You made a great mistake, I can tell you, when you started interfering between husband and wife. You have only yourself to thank if I don't allow you to continue to see Lucy." She stared at him. Do you mean, she said after a silence, that you intend to prevent my seeing her later on too? In London? That, exactly, is my intention. Miss Entwistle stared at him, lost in thought. But he could see he had got her this time, for her face had gone visibly pale. In that case, Everard, she said presently, I think it is my duty. Don't begin about duties. You have no duties in regard to me and my household. I think it is my duty to tell you that, from my knowledge of Lucy, your knowledge of Lucy, what is it compared to mine? I should like to know. Please listen to me. It's most important. From my knowledge of her, I'm quite sure she hasn't the staying power of Vera. It was his turn to stare. She was facing him, very pale, with shining, intrepid eyes. He had got her in her vulnerable spot, he could see, or she wouldn't be so white. But she was going to do her utmost to annoy him up to the last. The staying power of, he repeated. I'm sure of it. And you must be wise. You must positively have the wisdom to take care of your own happiness. Oh, good God, you preaching woman, he burst out. How dare you stand there in my own house talking to me of Vera? Hush, said Miss Entwistle, her eyes shining brighter and brighter in her white face. Listen to me. It's atrocious that I should have to, but nobody ever seems to have told you a single thing in your life. You don't seem to know anything at all about women, anything at all about human beings. How could you bring a girl like Lucy, any young wife, to this house? Here she is, and it still may be all right because she loves you so, if you take care, if you are tender and kind. I assure you it is nothing to me how angry you are with me, or how completely you separate me from Lucy, if only you are kind to her. Don't you realize, Everard, that she may soon begin to have a baby, and that then you indelicate woman, you incredibly indecent, improper, I don't in the least mind what you say to me. But I tell you that unless you take care, unless you are kinder than you're being at this moment, it won't be anything like 15 years this time. He repeated, staring. 15 years this time. Yes. Goodbye. And she was gone, and had shut the door behind her before her monstrous meaning dawned on him. Then, when it did, he strode out of the room after her. She was going up the stairs, very slowly. Come down, he said. She went on as if she hadn't heard him. Come down. If you don't come down at once, I'll fetch you. This, through all her wretchedness, through all her horror, for beating in her ears were two words over and over again. Lucy, Vera. Lucy, Vera. Struck her as so absurd, the vision of herself, more naturally nimble, going on up the stairs just out of Weems's reach, with him heavily pursuing her, till among the attics at the top he couldn't but run her to earth in a cistern, that she had great difficulty in not spilling over into a ridiculous, hysterical laugh. Very well, then, she said, stopping and speaking in a low voice, so that Lucy shouldn't be disturbed by unusual sounds. I'll come down. And shining, quivering with indomitableness, she did. She arrived at the bottom of the stairs where he was standing and faced him. What was he going to do? Take her by the shoulders and turn her out? Not a sign, not the smallest sign of distress or fear should he get out of her. Fear of him in relation to herself was the last thing she would condescend to feel, but fear for Lucy. For Lucy. She could very easily have cried out because of Lucy, entreated to be allowed to see her sometimes, humbled herself, if she hadn't gripped hold of the conviction of his delight if she broke down, of his delight at having broken her down, at refusing. The thought froze her serene. You will now leave my house, said Weems through his teeth. Without my hat, Everard? She inquired mildly. He didn't answer. He would gladly at that moment have killed her, for he thought she saw she was laughing at him. Not openly. Her face was serious and her voice polite, but he thought he saw she was laughing at him, and beyond anything that could happen to him, he hated being defied. He walked to the front door, reached up and undid the top bolt, stooped down and undid the bottom bolt, turned the key, took the chain off, pulled the door open, and said, "There now, go, and let this be a lesson to you." "I am glad to see," said Miss Entwistle, going out onto the steps with dignity and surveying the stars with detachment, "that it is a fine night." He shut and bolted and locked and chained her out, and as soon as he had done, and she heard his footsteps going away, and her eyes were a little accustomed to the darkness, she went round to the back entrance, rang the bell, and asked the astonished Tweeny, who presently appeared, to send Lizzie to her. And when Lizzie came, also astonished, she asked her to be so kind as to go up to her room and put her things in her bag, and bring her her hat and cloak and purse. "I'll wait here in the garden," said Miss Entwistle, "and it would be most kind, Lizzie, if you were rather quick." Then, when she had got her belongings, and Lizzie had put her cloak round her shoulders, and tried to express by smoothings and brushings of it her understanding and sympathy, for it was clear to Lizzie and to all the servants that Miss Entwistle was being turned out, she went away. She went away past and silent house, through the white gate, up through the darkness of the sunken oozy lane, out onto the road where the stars gave light, across the bridge, into the village, along the bridge, into the village, excuse me, along the road to the station, to wait for whatever train should come. She walked slower and slower. She was extraordinarily tired. End of chapter 31. Oh, Falcor, I was right there with you. I was so worried about those stairs. Yeah, and admitting that he came early, not out of concern for Lucy, but just to kick Aunt Dot out of the house because she was there uninvited and caring for Lucy and sending the doctor for her. And of course, Aunt Dot needs to pay for the doctor because he didn't order the doctor. Yes, and straight up saying that he would kill her. This was a wild chapter. I still have no idea how this is going to end. We have one last chapter. There's only 9 minutes in this chapter. I I don't know. And now I'm a little worried that it's going to be an ambiguous ending. Or that it's just going to be a bad ending and we'll just all be upset by it. I am scared. Again, still, constantly. There's something about this that from the very beginning, you just feel so unsettled. And I haven't felt this way with a media since watching Alien for the first time, where you're just so uncomfortable and you don't even necessarily know why yet, but you are not feeling great. Oh, yeah, of course. The ending is just not going to be happy. The comparison. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll see. All right. We only have 9 more minutes. One last chapter. How is it going to end? Nobody knows. Only one way to find out. Also, this is just seltzer water. Just to let you know. So tense. This is the type of story where, like, you would be reading it at night and you can't stop. You just can't stop. You have to keep going. No matter what time at the end, you have to keep going. You recognize the bubbly can. Yeah. All right. Chapter 32. Now I'm wondering if this is the last chapter. It is. Okay, just double checking. Okay. Weems went back into the library, and seeing his coffee still on the chimney piece, he drank it, and then sat down in the chair Miss Entwistle had left, and smoked. With the story, alcohol would be perfectly understandable. Surprise! Chapters 33 through 66, yes. Lil Bean is like our support dog right now. Yes, give treats. He wouldn't go up to Lucy yet. Not till he was sure the woman wasn't going to try any tricks of knocking at the front door or ringing the bells. He actually, so inaccurate was his perception of Miss Entwistle's character and methods, he actually thought she might perhaps throw stones at the windows. And he decided to remain downstairs, guarding his premises till this possibility became, with the lapse of time, more remote. Meanwhile, the fury of his indignation at the things she had said was immensely tempered by the real satisfaction he felt in having turned her out. That was the way to show people who was master, and meant to be master, in his own house. She had supposed she could do as she liked with him, use his house, be waited on by his servants, waste his electric light, interfere between him and his wife, say what she chose, lecture him, stand there and insult him, and he had showed her very quickly and clearly that she couldn't. As to her final monstrous suggestion, it merely proved how completely he had got her, how accurately he had hit on the punishment she felt most, that she should have indulged in such ravings. The ravings of impotence, that's what that was. For the rest of his life, he supposed, whenever people couldn't get their own way with him, were baffled by his steadfastness, and consequently became vindictive, they would throw that old story up against him. Let them. It wouldn't make him budge, not a hair's breadth, in any direction he didn't choose. Master in his own house, that's what he was. Is he reminding anyone else of Elon Musk? I'm not going to say that the comparison isn't warranted. Curious how women invariably started by thinking they could do as they liked with him. Vera had thought so, and behaved accordingly, and she had been quite surprised, and even injured, when he discovered she couldn't. No doubt this woman was feeling considerably surprised, too, now. No doubt she never dreamt he would turn her out. Women never believed he would do the simple, obvious thing. And even when he warned them, he would, as he could remember on several occasions having warned Vera. Indeed, it was recorded in his diary. They still didn't believe it. Daunted themselves by convention and the fear of what people might think, they imagined that he would be daunted, too. Then, when he wasn't, and it happened, they were surprised. And they never seemed to see that they had only themselves to thank. He sat smoking and thinking a long time, one ear attentive to any sounds which might indicate that Miss Entwistle was approaching hostilely from outside. Chesterton found him sitting like that when she came in to remove the coffee cup, and she found him still sitting like that when she came in an hour with his whiskey. It was nearly 11 before he decided that the danger of attack was probably over, but still, before he went upstairs, he thought it prudent to open the window and step over the sill onto the terrace and just look round. All was as quiet as the grave. It was so quiet that he could hear a little ripple where the water was split by a dead branch as the river slid gently along. There were stars, so that it was not quite dark, and although the April air was moist, it was dry underfoot. A pleasant night for a walk. Well, he would not grudge her that. He went along the terrace and round the clump of laurestinus bushes which cloaked the servants' entrance to the front of the house. Empty. Nobody still lingering on the steps. Then he proceeded as far as the white gate, holding her capable of having left it open on purpose, in order to aggravate me, as he put it to himself. It was shut. He stood leaning on it a minute, listening, in case he should be lurking in the lane. Not a sound. Satisfied that he had really gone, he returned to the terrace and re-entered the library, fastening the windows carefully and pulling down the blind. What a relief. What an extraordinary relief to have got rid of her, and not just for this once, but for good. Also, she was Lucy's only relation, so there were no more of them to come and try to interfere between man and wife. He was very glad she had behaved so outrageously at the end, saying that about Vera, for it justified him completely in what he had done. A little less bad behavior, and she would have had to be allowed to stay the night. Still, a little less, and she would have had to come to the Willows again, let alone having a free hand in London to influence Lucy when he was at his club playing bridge and unable to look after her. Yes, it was very satisfactory, and well worth coming down day earlier for. He wound up his watch, standing before the last glimmerings of the fire, and felt quite good-humored again. More than good-humored, refreshed and exhilarated, as though he had had a cold bath and a thorough rub-down. Now for bed and his little love. What simple things a man wanted. Only his woman and peace. Weems finished winding his watch, stretched himself, yawned, and then went slowly upstairs, switching off the lights as he went. In the bedroom there was a nightlight burning, and Lucy had fallen asleep, tired of waiting for Aunt Dot to come and say good night. But she woke when he came in. "Is that you, Aunt Dot?" she murmured, even through her sleepiness, sure it must be, for Everard would have turned on the light. Weems, however, didn't want her to wake up and begin asking questions, so he refrained from turning on the light. "No, it's your Everard," he said, moving about on tiptoe. "Shh, shh, shh, now. Go to sleep again, like a good little girl." Through her sleepiness, she knew that his voice, it meant one of his pleased moods. How sweet of him to be taking care not to disturb her. Dear Everard. He and Aunt Dot must have made friends then. How glad she was. Wonderful little Aunt Dot. Before dinner he was angry, and she had been so afraid. Afraid. What a relief. How glad. But Lucy was asleep again, and the next thing she knew was Everard's arm being slid under her shoulders, and she being drawn across the bed and gathered to his breast. "Who's my very own little baby?" she heard him saying, and she woke up just enough sleepily to return his kiss. The end. What do we think of the ending? Yep. And so it continues. Yeah. Yeah, so that is a bit of a frustrating ending. I wanted so much closure, and I wanted so desperately for something to happen to Weems. No, ma'am. No. I wanted so desperately for something to happen to Weems, and I was so anxious for something physically bad to happen to Aunt Dot or Lucy, but like so many times before, and continuing, this relationship will continue. For how long, nobody knows, but we do have the warning from Aunt Dot that it will not be 15 years. Yes, the ending will end like Vera's. Hmm. And Weems is not going to change anything at all. He learned absolutely nothing from what Aunt Dot said. And a lot of times I feel like there might be like an impact later on. Like maybe he's not listening now, but maybe something will come up later and he'll think about it and be like, oh, that's something that Aunt Dot said, and squirrel it away. I don't know. Yes, it is an ending painfully appropriate. Yeah, definitely not in this case. This is beyond anything that anybody can reach Weems for, I think. Or Lucy. Although I'm wondering if Aunt Dot said the same types of things or had the same tone with Lucy, if Lucy would have left with Aunt Dot, or if Lucy would have held on tighter to Weems. You know what I mean? And be like, oh no, it's not like that at all. Like he's only like this because he's protecting me, like, and sort of like explain it away. Or if she would have been like, you know what, you're right. I am feeling super unsettled in this house, and I'm so glad that you're here, and I just really need a friend and a family to help me leave. And now Lucy will forever be isolated. Oh, I had so many chills at that ending couple paragraphs. Lucy's too blind at this point, yes. But she's starting to see the issues, but she would have stayed. Okay, yes. This feels like it was one event away from 8 more drastic endings. Yes. Yes. I think so too. And I think the ending that we have is more realistic, for sure. Um, and more unsettling because we know how it's going to end. Like, Von Arnim didn't need to write it out for us to know that this is just a cycle that's going to keep happening. Yeah, yeah. Ooh, ooh. The most uncomfortable book I've read on stream. But definitely worth it for the discussions and for everything that's surrounding it. It absolutely hurts my heart. 1000%. Two things. I hate how this book made me feel. Yes. The author was masterful in getting that message across. Yes. I agree with you. And the way that the different thoughts were intermixed and presented to us is just seamless. Seamless. And very, very distinct voices in this between Lucy, Aunt Dot, and Weems. And you even get a couple thoughts with Lizzie, who's like, like it's only for the weekend. I can handle getting yelled at or being mistreated for 3 days. This is not a book I would have ever willingly read or finished on my own. It is a lot, and it is very emotionally heavy. Absolutely. Absolutely. Oof. But we're all supportive here. Yeah, I'm glad that we did. Yeah, and same, like if I was reading this like by myself, I mean I probably would have finished it, but it would have been a lot harder, and like having this support with everybody and having the discussions around it and like saying like no, this is not okay is is a great opportunity for sure. You read that this book was based in. Yes, it is, Star. It absolutely is. And when it came out, it was very controversial because the similarities were very obvious and people just didn't know about the treatment between her and her husband. So yes, you are right. Yes. It is about her second marriage. So yeah. And that's another reason why it feels so real because it was. That's a great question. Let me look that up actually. So it was published in I think 1921. Let's see here. Let me double check. Bup, bup, bup. Yeah, first published in 1921. Let's see if we can find about her. Oops. Oopsie poopsie. I should not be trusted with touch screens. Just not at all. Okay. Elizabeth von Arnim, novelist. Let's see. Wikipedia, tell me the answers. Okay. Hmm. Let's see. After her first husband's death and a 3-year affair with the writer H.G. Wells, she then married Frank Russell, the elder brother of the Nobel Prize winner and philosopher Bertrand Russell. She was cousin of the New Zealand born writer Catherine Mansfield. Okay, let's see. When did they get? Oh my gosh, she had 5 kids. Jeez. Okay, let's see. Spouse. Okay, so her second husband, they were married in 1916. So this book was published 5 years after their marriage. He died in 1931. Let's see if I can say anything about the marriage. Let's see. Second marriage and separation, house moves and death. Okay, let's see. Second marriage. Okay. Oh, the marriage ended in acrimony, with the couple separating in 1919, although they never officially divorced. Okay, so they were not together, but they weren't not together. Then she moved to the US where her daughters were living and then returned to Switzerland in 1920. So yeah, so she was still married. They were just separated. Um, well, legally married. hmm But yeah, whew, that's a doozy. And yeah, it's actually amazing. Yes. Yeah, Falkor, it is amazing that the tone wasn't more emotional with her writing uh from such a personal place. And yeah. And if they were separated in acrimony in 1919, I think is what I said, then she was probably writing it like right then, or maybe even a little bit before, depending on like the writing process. So let's see. I should have kept this up. She was not. Oop, oop, oop. She was born in 1866 and then married in 1916. Her first marriage was in 1891, so she was 20 something. It's hard to do math when people are watching me. You could see it being like this if it's coming from a place of being unable to process. Ooh, that's a good point. Hey, Ritalis, how's it going? Wadsworth, thank you so much for contributing to the Sunday stream. Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe this was her way of actually processing, if that makes sense. Like instead of processing and coming to terms with it and being at that acceptance stage and then writing it, this was her, a lot of things happened to me. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to write this down and help to cope or to deal with or to move past or to process. You think the narrative distance in the POV adds to it? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. She probably was writing in 19 and 20 to be published in 21. You're totally right. So yeah, she was writing right at the separation. And I'm wondering if there was a lot of like speculation about their separation or something like that, or like how he was playing it off as like his side of the story and this was her way of saying like what actually happened or like her side. Yeah, a lot of factors in there. And it is interesting knowing the like context around it. hmm So many questions. Not a treat, Lil Bean. Lil Bean has been nothing but kind. It truly was a wild ride. Yes, thank you all so much for being here. And because it is such a heavy read, and I have a really hard time just switching immediately to a new tone and a new story, we are going to end stream early today. On Thursday, we are going to start a completely new book and a completely new vibe. It's a let, let me just tell you the description, okay? And then we can all feel better. It is not about toxic relationships. Let me double check the title real quick and then I'll give a cute short little synopsis. Yeah, no. It's one of those books where like you need to process it or just like be in your blankie a little bit longer. It would be such a wild switch to immediately go into something else, which I have done before, and I regret doing that. So we're not gonna do that. Okay, let's see. What a short, quick little synopsis. Can you tell me a cute, quick little synopsis? Okay, well, it's called Storm Over Warlock, and it was supposed to be the first in a series, and it was never continued. The author just didn't continue it, although she has other sci-fi series. It's just they're a little difficult to track down. But it's written by Andre Norton, and that is her pen name so that she can be seen as a more reputable science fiction writer. But it says, again, totally different vibe, but here we go. The Throg task force struck the Terran survey camp a few minutes after dawn, without warning, and with a deadly precision which argued that the aliens had fully recon contoured and prepared that attack. Eye-searing lances of energy lashed back and forth across the base with methodical accuracy, and a single cowering witness, flattened on a ledge in the heights above, knew that when the last of those yellow-red bolts fell, nothing human would be left alive down there. And so Shan Lanty, most menial of the Terrans attached to the camp on the planet Warlock, was left alone and weaponless in this strange, hostile world, the human prey of the aliens from space and the aliens on the ground alike. So yeah, totally different vibe. Also, like, look at this. Can I zoom in? No, I can't. Okay, cool. Nope, can't. Okay. But the picture, like the cover, is very much like this is an old sci-fi book. like like look at this. Definitely vibes of an old sci-fi book and I am so excited. Yeah, totally different vibe. So I think we're gonna end it here. It'll be hopefully more fun, and I'm kind of hoping that it's like a little kooky, like B movie feel. So we'll see, we'll see. But I'm excited to read some old sci-fi. It'll be good. The roots of my favorite genre. You don't read a lot of sci-fi? Amazing. That is my preferred genre is science fiction. Because it's just a cool mix of escapism and also sometimes not escapism in that it could be something that happens in the future. So yeah. But yeah, that's gonna be it for tonight. Thank you all for this wild journey and for being here with me while doing it. I hope you all have a great day. I will be back on Thursday, 4 p.m. Central, where we will be reading the science fiction book. Take care of yourselves. Hydrate. Get some extra comfort. Listen to your body and listen to your mind and what do you need. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate your support and I appreciate you. If I don't see you on Thursday, I hope to see you very, very soon. Have a good night. Bye.